All right, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me here. So let me start off by saying it was a terrific talk by the two earlier keynotes. And this is by far the most pessimistic sustainability conference I've ever been to. I think my first sustainability conference was probably 20 years ago. It was in Copenhagen. I had written a paper called "The Price of Sin" about how owning sin stocks, makes you really rich. And I was invited to Copenhagen, and I thought, oh wow, people recognize my work. It's so fantastic, especially such smart people. And then I realized I was being brought in as like the evil person, mentioning that there were trade-offs associated with sustainability, right? And then everybody's saying like, well, how could it be? So now fast forward, 20 years, and of course, we don't have those issues anymore. But having said that, I'm actually pretty optimistic about sort of the way that our capitalist system is shaping up. Kind of the talk is called green, from capitalism to a green multi-stakeholderism. So I think it picks up a lot on what Sarah had talked about, but from a much more kind of economist, kind of a system view about how, I think, our current system is going to, how our system will operate in the future, and sort of what can we expect. And this is joint work with Brianna Chang. She's a brilliant theorist at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Okay, so it's just a quick motivation. I think the stakeholders, you can call them like moral imperative, as economists, we'll just call it their non-pecuniary preferences for corporate sustainability. So in particular, I'll talk about emissions abatement. These preferences spanned, and I think as Sarah mentioned, lots of different groups of stakeholders, right? Investors, banks, employees, supply chains, corporate partners, communities. And I really want to emphasize the multiple aspect, okay? These sorts of preferences, I think, have really led, in the last 20 years to a paradigm shift in terms of how corporations and financial markets operate. Yeah, a real paradigm shift. Of course, there's lots of complaints here and there, but it's been a massive shift in terms of how we've moved from a shareholder capitalism, right, where really only the profit motive sort of matters for corporate decisions, to what's called kind of this multi-stakeholder capitalism, where firms essentially face, they're still trying to maximize profits, but it's a constrained profit maximization problem that has to take into account these sustainability goals of a very rich array of stakeholders. Okay, and it's a very interesting problem because in economics, for a long time we've been operating under this sort of shareholder capitalism, and we have lots of beautiful theories and lots of beautiful math that kind of tell us properties of the system. But in this new world, we don't really have all the math and all of the equations set yet, and that's what this paper is trying to do. Is to kind of give some systemic analysis of what this multi-stakeholder capitalism is going to produce in terms of profits and in terms of abatement or sustainability outcomes. So we're going to give a theory, and kind of in our perspective, the way we kind of put the theory together is that multi-stakeholderism is combinatorial in nature, in the sense that if firms face this kind of constrained problem and all the stakeholders have their goals that they also want to achieve, there's going to be a process in which teams of firms and stakeholders are going to be optimally formed in the economy. Okay? And the way we model it is they're going to get formed in two dimensions. One is, of course, these sorts of goals and preferences about what a corporation should be doing as far as abatement. And the other, of course, is just kind of classic profits and productivity. Okay? And so in our model, affirms how sustainable it is, how much a firm abates in terms of its emissions, is going to reflect the joint preferences of the team of stakeholders that ends up being associated with the firm. And this is kind of a sorting or a matching process. And also the productivities of the team members, okay? And in current, I think, to the sort of a typical ESG literature in finance, where only investors' preferences matter for what a corporation does, we're going to try to explicitly account for the fact that there's multiple groups of stakeholders that have to all to combine together in order for you to get kind of firm output. Okay? And there's going to be a bunch of implications. I'll just go over a couple. First is on the optimality of this notion of divestment versus engagement, right? In other words, when should you as a stakeholder, like a big pension plan, decide to engage with a corporation and ask, like, should you do, things more sustainably versus just divest and go into some other corporation. And here, our theory suggests that the optimality of doing one or the other is going to depend on, the size of the firm. So basically, scale really matters, whether the firm is big or small. And also on the composition of other stakeholders. In other words, if I'm running a sustainable fund or I'm running a pension plan that's sustainable, when I think about abatement, I should think about also the preferences of all the other stakeholders that are a part of that company, right? Because it's not just finance or money that determines how much a corporation abates, right? It's going to depend on, a bunch of other preferences. So even if I'm a very green plan, if all my workers are brown, I'm not going to get that much abatement because they're just not going to be supporting these types of policies. And then the other implication is going to be about greenwashing, right? So there's a lot of blowback, of course, currently against ESG. I mean, a lot of it kind of revolves around greenwashing. I actually think a lot of the notions of greenwashing that people talk about are very misguided. So I think the model is going to, what does really greenwashing mean? How do we evaluate greenwashing? Okay, and so the model is going to offer some guidance on how to evaluate that. And then if I have some time, I'll talk a little bit about the data. I'll show you some data on emissions and revenue that I think is interesting and consistent with how I think these teams of stakeholders are formed in the economy. Okay, so I'm just going to make a couple of assumptions, and then otherwise I'll show you some pictures to kind of talk about kind of the key economics. So kind of the first assumption is for a firm to produce, it needs to have multiple types of stakeholders, okay, as part of its team. Right? So it's not just going to be investors or workers. It's going to be basically, a set of N stakeholders for the firm. And I think this is exactly to that 360-degree plot that Sarah had saying that, firms are pretty complicated. They have to deal with a lot of different types of stakeholders who may or may not share the same preferences. That's one. Or goals as far as sustainability. And the second is they may also have very heterogeneous productivities or talents. Okay? So kind of in the conception of the economy here, the key about why stakeholders play a fundamental role is that stakeholders are talented, right? And they bring a lot to the table in terms of output. A firm can't really operate without basically these stakeholders. Okay? Whether you think about it as like a big pension plan that has expertise and deep capital, or whether you think about very talented workers, or you think about a very efficient supplier, et cetera. Okay? The second big assumption is emissions or social ills are proportional to output. Right? That is, if you produce a lot, you're just going to have a bigger footprint. Right? So obviously, you're going to generate more emissions. And of course, in a world where emissions is not priced, as Patrick mentioned, right? That has negative effects on the stakeholders who really care about this, right? So if I'm working for a massively polluting plant, that's a lot different if I have green preferences than if I was working for a smaller polluting plant, right? In terms of my impact on the environment and how bad I feel about my association with the company, okay? So that's important. And then the third assumption is that these stakeholders, the way I think about this is that, I'm going to put everything together in terms of these goals or mandates, because a lot of these preferences may emanate also as part of government. So for instance, pension plans in Sweden, for instance, often have government mandates they have to follow for sustainability. Right? So as an economist, we're just going to call all of this this utility that the stakeholder is going to get if they're going to end up working for a company that pollutes, right? And they have green preferences, they're going to basically incur this utility. And then finally, I'm going to assume that there is some cost to abatement. So cleaning up is expensive, and so firms have to incur some costs when they're basically doing this cleanup. So we're going to think about an economy where there's a competitive equilibrium. So everyone actually is self-interested. Firms are profit maximizing. Stakeholders care about their overall utility. That includes the earnings that they get from associated with the firm, but also they care about this utility they get if they work for a firm that has a lot of pollution, right? But otherwise, all parties are optimizing, okay? It is competitive in the sense that, we're going to think about all parties as just meeting in some marketplace, and we're all going to come to a big dance hall, and we're going to all decide like who we're going to match with. I'm like, oh, that green banker there, I'm a green worker. I'm going to hang out with him, and I'm going to go find the firm that maybe is a little bit mid-sized, and then we're going to make ourselves really green. And it's going to be terrific because my firm's going to be really green, and it's not going to cost that much because I'm working with multiple counterparties to share the cost. Yeah? Okay. So it's really kind of a dance hall type of theory. We're going to come in a dance hall. Everybody's got some label. How productive am I? How green am I? And we're going to dance. We're going to form up in teams. You're going to be back in elementary school like my 8-year-old. And it's going to be a mess, right? But eventually people will find each other, and they're going to figure out how to generate the most profit, right, with the least cost in terms of generating the most abatement. Okay? And so there's going to be some transfers, meaning that once we get together as a team, we're going to generate this overall package of profits and utility, and then we're going to just divvy up for ourselves. We're going to kind of say, like, okay, look, as a firm, you're going to get 5% of the residual profits. As a worker, I'll get this, and then we're going to split up the surplus. Okay, so that's why the markets match. So economists refer to this type of dance matching process as stable matching. Once people get into teams, no one really wants to change, right? They're kind of happy where they are. Okay, and we're going to look for an equilibrium in this matching problem. So generally, I could kill you with all the math. It's complicated. AI could solve it, but luckily we didn't need AI, and we were very eco-friendly. We could do it with just our brains. We kind of, without AI, humans basically, the human AI is like we made some guesses. We guessed, right? Guess and verify. Guess, guess, guess. That's why I teach my 8-year-old. Guess everything, just guess, and then just see if it works. If not, that's fine. So we're going to have some algorithm where we can kind of describe to you who ends up with whom in this matching process, okay? All right, so now let me kind of take you through some pictures, and then that's kind of pretty much my talk. So let me kind of give you an example. So this is shareholder capitalism, all right? So in a shareholder capitalist world, there's the firm. The firm really, for us, doesn't have any preferences. It's just there. It's got some technology. It's got some scale. So you can see the numbers 1, 2, 3. 1 indicates the most productive firms. 2 is the middle productive. 3 is the least productive. Okay? And the little balls indicate these different firms. Now, for a firm to produce, it's going to need in this economy 2 stakeholders, just as an example. Banks, to give it some loans, and workers, right, to kind of put it together with the technology, and then you're going to basically get some output. And in this world where, no one cares really about the environment or anything, it's pretty easy the matching process. We're going to assume that, look, there's some complementarities to the matching. So if one's matched with one, you just get a lot more output, right? So it's very easy. So the ones find each other, they're going to produce the most output. You're going to call that like Apple computers, right? Apple has the best technology. They got, as far as we can tell, the best engineers, and they got the best bankers, right? And then 3s will be the more little firms, right? So they'll be smaller than Apple. Maybe their engineers are not as great as Apple's engineers, and their profits are smaller overall. Okay. Now, in this world, of course, the emissions will be much bigger by the bigger companies, right? And that's why everybody's brown. But nobody cares about the emissions, so it doesn't matter. We just kind of, go to our number 1s, number 2s, and number 3s, right, for our dance. Now, what would happen if, let's say, a bunch of the workers were green, right? So that's going to be indicated by these little green things here, right? So here, half the workers are green. They really care, right? So if they work for a company and they decide to go to a dance and they produce a lot of pollution, they don't feel great about it. And maybe a few of the banks care, okay? Right? So now we have a dance. Right now, people are going to show up with these different, you got the numbers, and you got the brown, and you got the green color. Who do they match with? Right? Do people still stay with each other? Do the ones still stay with the ones? Or do they start kind of changing their partners? Okay? And this is sometimes what's referred to as engagement versus like divestment. That's what we're going to think about it. Like if you're going to change partners, that's sort of like a divestment. You're like, you know what? I suddenly became green. I don't currently love my dance partner here. I'm going to try to find myself a different partner. Yeah? And engagement would be, I can reasonably talk to my company and we're going to all agree that we should kind of be greener. Right? So this is the optimality, if you will, the success of divestment or engagement. Now, let me first talk about workers, and then I'll talk about banks and workers. So let me just, for now, assume that in the dance hall, the banks are still going to be brown, but the workers show up and some of them will be green. Okay? And I'm going to now show you the match where, so if you notice, in the brown picture, all the ones always match with the ones, right? The most productive workers match with the most productive firms. But in this world, with some stakeholder capitalism, the productive workers who are green actually don't match with the biggest firms. They match with slightly less productive firms. Okay, that's the twos. Okay? And they're going to turn the twos to a color what I'll call gray, meaning they're not as brown as they used to be. They're still they're not green because, this worker is only one stakeholder. He has to pay for everything, but he still has a family to feed. Right? So you know what? I don't feel great about the pollution, so I don't want brown, but I'll go a little gray. And number two, the too productive firm is okay with it because, why is there a difference? Is because the one firms that generate a lot of pollution, for them to hire any talented green worker is just expensive because they just have to do more cleaning to make that worker happy. Right? So the trade-off here, right, is that the green worker is going to say, and this is optimal on both sides, yeah? Because everybody has to agree in the dance. The green worker basically says, look, you know what? It's just not optimal for me anymore to just be working for this super big company and generating all this pollution, which makes me unhappy. I'm going to work with a slightly less productive firm, generate a slightly less pollution. I'll still be profitable, right? And then I won't have it won't be so much cleaning to basically do, right? And I feel better about that. Okay? So first implication of this is that it's much easier to turn small firms gray than it is to turn a big firm gray. Right? They just have a smaller footprint. Okay? And so that's why you see kind of in the firm, once they start matching with these green workers, they're going to start turning some gray. Now, here's kind of the interesting part. Of course, as Sarah pointed out, it's easy if it's just a worker, there it is, right? You just kind of go to the dance and you find the guy. Well, what if there was a bank? What if there was the supplier? What if there was like N of these guys? Where would they kind of end up matching? And that's the combinatorial aspect. So I know it's late in the afternoon, so this is a tough one. I'm just going to take you through this one. So now I'm going to bring to the dance the banks, okay, are also, some of them are green. Okay? So now, who does the bank choose to be with? Okay? So here, you can see now there's another color in firms, which is that some of the previously gray firms turn green, like real green, when the green bank comes and joins them. Yeah? And the reason is because now you have two stakeholders that can share the cost of abatement, right? In other words, we have a shared, this is the shared value is not shared profit values. We have a shared value in the sense we both want to clean up and we're going to share the cost of cleaning. So we can turn our firm like just really deep green. Like we're going to go crazy on sustainability. Not just like, little gray stuff, like really green. We're going to be like a green paradise, right? Because we get to share the cost. Okay. So that's where you can see like the one basically turns that two, right, really dark green, and then, and that's kind of the logic. So the divestment is the following. That very big bank that was brown that turned green, he's not going to be able to get the one to be even gray. It's not worth it economically. He would rather go to the slightly less, he would rather join the green worker with the gray firm and make it really green, yeah? Okay, and have kind of a big impact because the costs get kind of shared. The engagement, so he has to move. So he's not going to be able to the banker is not going to be able to be with like the big bad polluting firm anymore. He's going to have to go to this slightly less productive, slightly smaller firm, but make it really green. At the very bottom, that 3, that's engagement because That 3 was with the gray firm. He turned green, and then the gray firm said, no problem, stay here. We're going to go green, right? No need to divest. No need to change dance partners, right? Let's just like implement and make ourselves really green, no problem. Okay? And that's kind of like the punchline, which is that the model kind of tells you that in a competitive equilibrium, in a dance hall equilibrium, you will be able to generate maximum profits and maximum abatement. Right? That's the benefit of a competitive market. Right? You don't need the government to kind of tell you. Right? The competitive market, this is a sustainable market, right? That's able to find the right matches to give you the best profits. Of course, there's costs. I mean, there's trade-offs. The trade-offs are going to be represented in what? Both firms, workers, and banks are going to have to take a little bit of a haircut on their previous profits, of course. Yeah? Or their previous earnings. But not nearly as much as if they were just kind of randomly just matching with other people, because this is efficient, right? This is their way to generate the most abatement utility possible, right? With the least sacrifice to profits, essentially. Okay? And I'm going to stop right there, and I'll save any queries you may have for the Q&A. Thanks.